Because we have a snack break coming up, let's get up for just a quick second, do a little stretch. I know everyone's really tired. You don't have to get up, but at least do a little wiggle. Let's get some energy running. Okay, cool, that's enough. So as that lovely introduction stated, I'm an information experience for one of those job titles that was referenced earlier, an information experience writer at Atlassian. My team works on a few products, Confluence, some of you may know, Jira Service Desk, and Jira Projects, which is a few other things. And we basically are part of the design team now. We write long-form documentation, UI copy, we run a few content experiments when possible. So today we'll cover a few basics of voice and tone, some of the challenges around defining voice and tone together, and then some lessons from Atlassian's recent exploration of our own voice and tone guidelines and expanding those to the rest of the company. So, voice and tone. I'll start off with this quote, which is basically my talk in an entire quote, which is awesome. Creating meaningful interactions with users requires a strategic voice with a human tone. So MailChimp, where the writer or the speaker of this quote works, has long-standing been an example of voice and tone. They're so into it that they actually own the voiceandtone.com domain, which is where their voice and tone guidelines live. Very handy. There's a bit of history for us here as well, as Kate Kiefer-Lee, who said this, actually hosted a webinar back in 2013 that our writers attended back when we were trying to figure out what the heck this voice and tone thing was and how we should make our own guidelines. So what is this? Now that I've said the words voice and tone about 10 times, and we'll probably use them 100 more times in this talk. Voice and tone together are basically a branding tool. Your brand's voice should basically never change. It should be consistent and recognizable by your customers. Tone, on the other hand, is where that brand starts to become a bit more human, a bit more familiar. It should actually adapt to the scenario, the audience, and what that user's feeling at that time. If we put this another way, if you were a real person, which I think most of you are, think about how your tone would be a little bit different if you were just chatting with a group of friends telling a joke, or if you were chatting with a customer to tell them that their site has just crashed. Hopefully there's a bit of a discrepancy between how those two things would sound. So a few more examples of awesome voice and tone. This is Warby Parker. It's an eyeglasses company, and their entire business model is basically based on excellent customer service. And they're renowned for having this very personable voice and tone. Basically, if you guys aren't familiar with it, you can order a set of glasses, try them on. If you don't like them, you can just send them back completely free. They now have in-person stores, so you can do the same thing, but this whole kind of personable approach holds through. So on this page, this is their FAQ. Boom. You can see a few examples of their voice and tone. So just abbreviating them, and then what is Warby Parker, or where did it come from, the stork, just kidding. There's already a few little bits that let you understand what their brand is, and these interactions carry through any experience you'll come across. So the second one is, of course, MailChimp. It has to be. So these are just a few examples from their voice and tone site. You can see that there's a whole list of content types of different scenarios, what the user's feeling at that time, tips, and then what kind of content you should actually display. As their guidelines state, though, their voice is basically constant, and it's just the tone that's changing in all of those content scenarios. Okay, so those were two really good examples, but why is this so hard? In Atlassian's case, we came across a few challenges, and likely these are some challenges that other companies have faced. So for us, thankfully this is quite a few years ago, very old branding, just if you tweet that. But this is an example of where we just completely missed the mark. It's a 404 page, seems like something fairly innocent, but we actually had a customer email our founders telling them about a missing child experience, which is awful, and basically an example of where something inside, no one had had that experience, seemed good to go, awesome, just a 404 page, but that's a pretty bad branding experience and something fairly negative as well, and just goes to show that something minor can actually have a really big impact on your brand. There are a few things that really led to this situation. The first is different scenarios. So basically in a 404 page, people are frustrated, they don't maybe need to see kind of an image of something already really negative. thrown in their face. And Atlassian's case, we are a software company, obviously, so our scenarios come in the form of 404 pages, billing emails, just registration, onboarding copy, anything. Scenarios in your case can just be anything that you identify in that user's flow. And the important thing with those scenarios is to note what the user is feeling at each stage. A second challenge, which I think is probably the trickiest, is personal preference. Definitely happened in that milk carton example. But tone is extremely subjective. You've probably all had that moment where you're in a room or with a group of people and you've told a joke and then maybe realize you're the only one laughing. Super awkward. It's definitely happened to me a few times. But this is one of the things where you just need to work with basically with your peers, with your customers, to understand what tone actually makes sense, what tone resonates. Especially in an international company or any global product, this is really important because some things just don't translate well. And then the third thing is a broken process. If you do have awesome voice and tone guidelines, you've kind of nailed the personal preference issue. If you don't have those voice and tone experts or voice and tone guidelines actually shared with the people who are shipping that content, they're kind of just rendered useless in a way. So without these guidelines, Atlassian actually had a fairly disjointed brand and kind of inconsistent voice experiences across all of its products. Kind of things like that milk carton example really kicked off this conversation. We attended webinars from MailChimp, and we were like, we just really need to nail this. So together with our content marketing team, we kicked off a voice and tone exploration. And these are some of the solutions we came up with to tackle those challenges. First up, if you want to spread voice and tone around the entire company, everyone needs to understand why you actually need this thing. So we have to basically break this down into 3 benefits, and these are at least the things that worked really well for us. So the first really, really powerful way that voice and tone can be used is as a brand tool, as I mentioned. So making sure that your brand identity is consistent across all products requires that consistent voice. In Atlassian's case, we have a whole range of products. We don't actually have an outbound sales team, so we really require people to just serve themselves. We need them to recognize our brand on their own. We are so reliant on word of mouth that our voice and tone is like really key in that. The second thing is human connection. Just make it about people. Again, that tone is that part that becomes personable, it adapts to a situation, it becomes a bit more emotional. One of our writers has an awesome quote that says, "Poor copy may not be the reason people leave a product, but good copy can be the reason that they stay." Especially in the evaluation process when you're getting information overload, you're trialing 10 different things, you don't really know what's going on. Those little pieces of copy, those moments where you can make a human connection with a customer can really, really drive your customer to actually buy, which is what keeps our business alive. And then from there, once they've actually jumped on board, you need to engage them. You need to maintain the fact that they are your customer. In this case, we can drive things. This is where the experimentation part comes in, but you can A/B test copy and make sure that it's actually driving usage of a feature, for example. If you build something really awesome, that's great, but if the customer can't find it and they're not using it, then you're, again, not really driving anything. So that little tiny piece of copy saying, hey, did you know that this is new, or this is what you can do with this tool, can actually increase that usage. So once you've actually understood the importance of voice and tone, you can define it, which is the fun part. In this case, you can look at your brand guidelines. If you have company values, Atlassian has kind of 4 or 5 solid ones. Try to pick out some key words or emotions within those that actually drive the voice and tone that you want to own, the voice and tone that you want to be visible in your content. This is where we landed after a few workshops with, again, content marketers, information experience writers, designers, basically everyone, to make sure that the voice and tone could apply to products, error messages, status pages, emails, marketing blogs, all of the things. So Atlassian's voice and tone are bold, optimistic, and practical with a wink. That little one's important. Basically what this means is that you're bold, so you're direct without being cocky, and each one kind of has a be this but not this. to keep it in check. So you're bold, but not cocky. You want to keep the customer in control. You want to inspire them, but you don't want to just aggressively tell them what to do. You then are optimistically provide them with a solution. At the same time, you don't want to be delusional. You don't want to give them that 4-page error, but be like, it's okay, you can still do your thing, when obviously the page is dead. They can't do anything. And then the last one is being practical. So you want to be direct. You want to tell them what to do, but you don't want to be immature. And so we have this with the wink, and I'll get into it a little bit more later. But you don't want it to kind of drive to the side of being inappropriate or just being too funny when the customer doesn't need that. Like, just don't get in their way with wink. Don't go over winking. So when defining voice and tone, this is something I found myself repeating a lot. So voice doesn't change, but the tone does. And I think is a hard thing to grasp because you're looking at a marketing blog or you're looking at a long-form piece of really technical documentation, and it seems like they're quite different things. But the important thing is that voice really does need to stay the same. It shouldn't sound like the document doesn't need to be the exact same. You don't need to have kind of funny jokes in each one, but the casual, like that Warby Parker example, that kind of casual idea, if that's your style, should kind of hold true in both. Just obviously in a marketing blog, you can probably have a little bit more fun. In a long-form piece of doc, be a bit more straight to the point. To help kind of get this across, learn by example. For Atlassian, because we have this somewhat contentious wink situation, we actually have an internal wink repository where we have examples of where it works really well and examples of where it just really kind of failed. And then we try to have a bit of customer feedback so people actually understand why, because those fail examples can still get a laugh, but you have to understand that in the broader context, it didn't really work. We have a second thing too that we found really useful, kind of based on MailChimp's voice and tone, but we call them Voicify cards. And I'll throw one up now, hopefully it's not too blurry. So this is an example of a Voicify card that one of our writers and a product manager made at a 24-hour innovation project. It's pretty awesome, but basically it describes what the scenario is, what your job as a writer is, addressing the user feelings, and then on the flip side, there are a few examples. And you can see that that voice and tone guide is always there, it's just scaling at different ways. So for an error message, which is a pretty bad situation, you obviously don't want much wink happening. And right now, these are only available, in our case, for UI copy, so in-app copy. But in the future, we'd want to kind of build it out for marketing blogs, long-form documentation, email, so people can actually use them, because they've been quite useful. So at this point, you've defined your voice and tone. Hopefully, your company understands it. But now you need to roll it out to your teams. So we had one of our challenges that was called a blocked process. What do you do to solve that? You create a better one. In this case, we had to make sure that our writers were actually really fully embedded within any team that was shipping something with content. Atlassian's still growing. We're spread across all of these different offices. So we just, to make sure that our voice and tone guidelines are consistent, because they're still relatively new, just 1 or 2 years old, we basically have to have a writer, at least not in the content creation process, but in the review process for each team. So we kind of boiled this down into a simple kind of BuzzFeed style thing, just voicify your content in 3 steps. The first is setting the scene. So you have to actually know the scenario. For us, that means, again, grabbing a QA, designer, developer, product manager, all the people, and making sure that you know exactly what the customer is going to go through and what they're going to feel in that moment. Second is very handy. Just grab a Voicify card for that UI copy example at least, and then understand the different tone that you can apply in that situation. Third, and probably just as equally important, is reviewing. So for tech writers, or IXers, I still use tech writers, we actually have a chat room set up where we can review each other's content. If we're unsure if we've kind of nailed the tone or gone a bit too far, we can just spar it back and forth. And then once we've done that initial peer review, we actually share it then back with the product teams, so the product managers and the designers and developers can give a bit more feedback. Once you've done that, you can share it with the world. So you've nailed this process within your own team, but there are still a lot of people out there that don't have that close connection to a content team. And you don't want blogs or little status updates going out that are just not voicified. So what we've started to do is something called content audits, and we are definitely not all the way there. Jira's about 15 years old at this point, so there's a lot of code hanging around. But what we've started doing is just pairing with a developer, usually a bug fix developer, diving into the code and creating a backlog of all snippets that just don't comply with our voice and tone or are just wrong, and then voicifying them. So it's something that you'll basically kind of be able to do probably every 6 months or so. It's a long process, but it's good to just keep that in your mind that voicify is not just a one-step thing, it's ongoing. The second thing that we found really helpful in terms of sharing voice and tone with other people we don't directly work with is, of course, workshops. We've kicked off a boot camp for new hires mainly, and it goes through an exercise that I'll friendly and make you do in a bit. And basically helps them understand what voice and tone is, why you need to apply these guidelines, and of course, reviewing. So we're soon going to kick off a global board so people can submit content for review for Voicify questions to our writers, even if they don't directly work with us. And this is important because we have people like user researchers and product managers who are actually really uncomfortable writing, and then let alone writing in the Atlassian voice and tone. So having this kind of open channel has proven really useful. So on that note, let's use our brains. So I'll chuck up this card again. And I grabbed this hopefully not offensive message from Windows. And what I wanted you guys to do, just on your laptops or writing or in your heads, is just think of a few ways of rewriting this with that Atlassian voice card as your example. So try to rewrite in the kind of design thinking mindset like 3 or 4 different examples. If you're brave enough, you can shout them out here, and I'll also go over a few that our new hires thought of at this time. But take about just 2 minutes total, and then I'll interrupt you again with my voice. Go. So you can write on notepads, write on your laptops. I might call on anyone. And let me know if anyone can't read that example. I need to put on Jeopardy music or something. Okay, well, I don't see many people writing, but feel free to come grab me if you did come up with a few things. So in this case, it's obviously not an Atlassian message, but we can still use our voice and tone guidelines. Some of the things that people who are not on the writing team came up with, which I thought was fantastic, were just killing the dialogue altogether and making sure that the user could just stay within the task that they were actually trying to do, so making it contextual. So if they didn't have a name that was right, just block them from actually saving it. Don't let them see that dialogue in the first place. Another solution that people came up with was actually letting them rename in the dialogue itself, so you didn't have to see it, close it, try again 5 times. Another one, which was more of a UX thing, but still within our design guidelines, is killing one of the X's. There's like 10 X's on this dialogue. There's a close. It's like just X in your face. So even though that's not words, it's still part of the overall experience. So I'll just chuck back this beautiful example and kind of show how we applied our own guidelines to a 404 page. So this is, let me go back. So this is something we came up with for our design site. It's an error message, and it's definitely way on the playfulness side, but we decided that was okay because it's just for our design guidelines. You're not trying to buy anything. It's not in our products. It's just for designers looking at our brand guidelines. We also included a little portrait of our head of design because it made us laugh. So this is a good example for us, but it's also one that we have to be very careful not to overuse. So it really works in this scenario, but a 404 in a case like a product or billing purchase probably can't have this much wink. So we're almost there, final stretch. But if you guys are still in the process of finding your own voice or voicifying your own content, creating voice and tone guidelines, there are a few things that you can just take away from this talk. Remember that voice and tone is a really strong branding tool. And that strong, consistent voice and tone can really actually take your product, your service, your blog to new heights. It can actually build customer loyalty and trust because people recognize you and they know your voice. They kind of feel like they can talk to you as a friend. So 3 awesome takeaways. Easy as that. Find your voice, understand your tone, and then conquer the world. So easy. And that was it. Find me after if you have any questions. There's an unconference on Confluence and Scroll version, so I'm going to definitely run to that. But let me know if you have any questions on voice and tone, those Voicify guidelines, those Voicify cards, and I'll find you after. Thank you.